Okay, let's talk about osmolarity. So, osmolarity again was the number of osmotically active substances within a fluid. And let's talk about this little chart and what it shows and how we can use it to indicate osmolarity and volume. Now, osmolarity, remember, was determined by the number of osmotically active substances within a fluid. Now, whether there's increased osmolarity or decreased osmolarity, it depends on different things. So increased osmolarity is when you have an increased amount of solutes that are osmotically active coming in to your fluids, okay? And anything that's increased, you're going to refer to as hyperosmotic. Hyper meaning above average kind of. And hypo rhymes with low, so that's low. So not as much sort of osmotically active solutes coming in. By the way, how do solutes come in? They come in dissolved within a substance. And so if we're even more specific, hypoosmotic would mean that there's more water than solute coming in. So a hypoosmotic would actually have a low osmolarity value as well. Okay, because if you imagine you're adding sort of a colored dye or something to water, and the less dye you add, the lighter the color will be, but the more dye you add, the darker the color will be. And hyperosmotic would be essentially more solute than water. And I am writing it like this, but when it comes to hyperosmotic and hypoosmotic, they're not referring to the solute versus solvent composition. They're actually referring to the difference between our fluid composition and our fluid osmolarity and this new substance coming in. So hyper compared to us, okay, compared to our fluid osmolarity, okay? Now, in terms of a steady state, in a steady state, this was one of the equalities that we actually have. The extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid have the same osmolarity, okay, in a steady state, in a state of homeostasis. Now, osmolarity is usually 290 milliosmolarity per litre, 290, but for diagrammatic sake and conceptual sake, we can just kind of round this to 300 for us. Now, in terms of volume, when we're talking about volume expansion and contraction, which is going to occur as a result of different fluid uptake, different fluid intake, then we are actually here referring to the extracellular fluid in particular. And the way to understand osmolarity from an analogy point of view, imagine a band of choir or somebody who's a singer, and basically the more air that they breathe in as they're inhaling, about to make a sound, about to sing that song, the higher the pitch will be. So let's say the more air molecules that somebody takes in, or for example, that so means more solutes, more osmotically active solutes, the higher the osmolarity. So a pitch kind of is the same thing as osmolarity in this sense. And I'm just telling you this analogy to allow you to make the connection between osmolarity and volume. As the singer breathes in, they have more air molecules, and these air molecules represent our solutes, or our salt, or our NaCl, sodium chloride, anything. And as they breathe in, as they have these air molecules, the diaphragm expands, doesn't it? And basically the lungs expand as well. And that's inhaling. The diaphragm moves down, the lungs expand. And that means that there is definitely an impact on volume as well. Okay, that's just for you to remember the link. Okay, now when the substance the saline solution, for example, that you're taking in is hypertonic, hypotonic, or isotonic. Now let's say the intracellular, this is 290, or let's say it is 300. If we're bringing in something that's also 300, by the way, something that we didn't actually quite discuss in the last video was that the NaCl and these osmotically active substances are going to drive water. They're really, really, really going to drive water. And what does this mean? This means that if we have our cell, right, and your osmotically active substances are rising, rising, rising here. So let's, for example, let's look at the hypertonic. Actually, we're going to look isotonic, but let's say if it was rising, 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 the osmolarity or the pitch to the point where it's going to explode. It's rising, 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 rising. That means that the osmolarity is higher, right? And water moves from a high concentration to a low concentration. The osmolarity is higher, and the water is going to be less concentrated as a result, because it's going to be filled with these concentrated solutes. So the water is going to move in this way. Another way to remember it is that more dollar hollers the water. I just came up with that off the top of my head, but let's say it's got a higher value. Let's say the osmolarities rise. They've given us a hypertonic solution. They've given us NaCl through a drip, through an intravenous, and let's say the osmolarity rises as high as 360. And obviously intracellular fluid is not going to be affected immediately. Extracellular fluid is going to be affected first. This is going to go to 360. This means, let's say the water always runs towards where there's the higher number. So automatically that's how you're always going to remember the direction of flow of the water, right? And as the water goes over here, that means there's going to be, in the intracellular fluid, there's going to be less and less water because the water's going here, and there's going to be essentially more, there's going to be less water, so there's going to be more solutes. So the initial osmolarity of this is going to rise, rise, rise to 350 until it gets to 360. And let's say both of these balance out to 360. That's going to make it osmotically stable, or osmotically in equilibrium. But the hypertonic solution, what it's actually going to do, it's going to cause an expansion, because you did add lots of water. It's going to cause an expansion, and the osmolarity is increased in both sections. The extracellular fluid is going to expand, so that's what the shift is going to look like, okay? Let's talk about isotonic, okay? That was hypertonic, and we'll come back to that. Let's talk about isotonic and hypotonic. So here's isotonic. Now, I've told you that our stable osmolarity is 300. Isotonic means the same. So let's say through intravenous administration we inject 300 milliosmolarities per liter. That's the same as what we already have, okay? So all that's going to do is this is already 300, this is already 300. Are you injecting more solutes? No, because the solute concentration is the same. You are putting in more water, more fluid, because you are adding, like, let's say a liter of that, right? Let's say you are adding a liter of that. That is going to cause expansion. However, it's not going to cause any change in osmolarity, because the solution you're putting in is isotonic. It's the same concentration as what you already have. Now, if we look at hypotonic, by the way, here, because there's no, basically here, because you have no, sorry, I haven't made a mistake here. There's going to be nothing affecting the intracellular fluid here, because you're adding 300, so there is no, because you're adding 300 and the initial concentration was already, the osmolarity was already 300, you're not going to have any water shift going, because there's no concentration gradient essentially for the water to move by, so you're not going to have any shift. No shift, okay? This is quite a boring one. You will have expansion of extracellular fluid, because of course you are adding fluid and it is going to affect the extracellular fluid part, but since osmolarity does not change, there's no OS-D, no OS difference, no difference in osmolarity, there's not going to be any shift. Let's go to hypotonic. Let's say we put in 150 millimoles per liter or whatever. Okay, that is going to mean that you are hypotonic, you're injecting hypotonic, that's going to mean that you're injecting more water kind of than solution. So the 300 that was here is going to go down. The osmolarity is going to decrease because this is not a high osmolarity value, okay? Our original compared to ours, everything's compared to ours. And because it's 150, which is half basically, this is half a saline solution, let's say. That's going to decrease this 300 to, let's say, it's going to make it go down, make it go down, make it go down to, let's say, until 150, let's say around 200. Now, because this has decreased the osmolarity, water is going to, because the water concentration compared to here, this was already 300, right? But this has now gone down to 290 or 260, 250. Let's say that because the osmolarity is decreased, there's less high solute concentration, there's more, that means water will flow this way, basically high to low. Because you're decreasing the osmolarity, right? Because you're decreasing the osmolarity, that means that the water concentration will increase. That means the water will flow from high to low. Okay, so here, what do you have to remember? That the osmolarity goes down because you're putting in a hypotonic solution, and the water concentration increases. So water goes from high to low in this direction, and until it goes equivalent. But so now osmolarity decreases, but there is more water, and it is affecting both sides. So you can draw the shift like this. And the osmolarity is low, so it's going to be less than the baseline. Continue in the next part.